BIONICLE Adventures 8 Challenge of the Hordika. Written by Greg Foshti. Narrated by Amruki, Toa of Fire. Chapter 8. Four Vaki Zadok moved cautiously through the streets of Metru. They were far from the canyons of Metru they normally patrolled, but the changes in Metru Nui meant every Vaki enforcer had to do its part to preserve order. Their goal was the Colosseum. Metru Nui's tallest building soared high into the sky before them, though it lacked the grand appearance it once had. Now the facade was cracked and the entire structure was shrouded in webs. High levels of Vizorak activity had been registered here. The Vaki's mission was to eliminate these creatures of disorder as a first step towards pacifying the entire city. The patrol leader signaled for the rest to spread out. It had no doubt that these Rahi would fall easily to the power of the Vaki, but tactical programming suggested that approaching from multiple angles was practical. Once all four were in their proper position, the march resumed. The Vaki on the far left flank was the first to encounter the target. A Vizorak Bogarak crawled along a web leading from the Colosseum to one of the empty Metru forges. The Vaki raised its staff and unleashed a blast which knocked the Vizorak off the web. The Bogarak scrambled to its feet and glared at the Vaki. A low hum filled the air. The Vaki took another step and stumbled. It looked down and noted that its right leg was no longer functioning properly. Somehow, what had been a solid limb a moment before was now a rapidly dispersing gas. Worse, the effect was spreading across the Vaki's form. In a matter of seconds, it was no more than wisps of silvery gas floating in the air, its awareness dispersed over millions of molecules. The Vaki on the right dropped down into four-legged mode, scaled a small building, and then climbed out onto a Vizorak web. A quick scan revealed that there were no Vizorak on this section. Traveling along the web would bring the Vaki right to what appeared to be a largely unguarded entrance to the Colosseum. Using its tools as forelegs, it began to crawl. It had gone only a short distance when it realized that the amount of effort required to make it across the web seemed to be increasing. Energy use was up, mass had increased dramatically, and strangest of all, audio receptors were picking up a hum that had not been there before. The Vaki did a visual inspection of its structure, only to discover its outer surface was no longer gleaming metallic protodermis, but solid stone. The Metru enforcer was pondering what could cause a Vaki to turn to rock when the webbing tore beneath it. The Zadok plunged through the hole and hit the ground, smashing into hundreds of stony fragments. A Bogarak approached, kicked at the rubble that had been a Vaki moments before, and then crawled away. The Vaki patrol leader paused. Several Vizorak were on the move between it and the nearest Colosseum entrance. The Zadok turned to tell its second-in-command to wait until the creatures had passed before proceeding, but its lieutenant was not there. Puzzled, the Vaki did a visual scan to all 4 points of the compass. There was no sign of any of the other 3 patrol units. The Zadok took a step and then paused at a strange rustling sound from overhead. A glance up revealed its source, a Vaki cocooned in webbing, being carried across the webs towards the Colosseum by a pair of Vizorak. The patrol leader did a quick calculation. 4 Vaki departed on this mission. 1 remains, it said to itself. This will need to be reported. While success in this mission is vital, order can only be maintained if a strict accounting of the whereabouts of all Vaki is kept. No priority. Prompt return to Central Hive. Naturally, he would not run. Vaki never ran unless in pursuit of a lawbreaker. Faced with the disappearance of 3 of its kind in a matter of seconds, though, the Zadok was perfectly willing to walk very, very fast. It glanced behind. No Vizorak were following. That would look good in the report. The patrol had obviously scared the Vizorak into staying out of Metru. That accomplishment might even mean elevation from patrol leader to squad leader. Pale sunlight suddenly gave way to shadow. The ground shook, believing it to be another earthquake. The Vakis searched for cover. It raced toward a large green and brown structure nearby. A second tremor struck, then a third. The building rocked so hard it almost appeared to be moving. It was only after the Vaki was safely underneath the structure that it remembered there were no green and brown buildings in Tom Metru. The Vaki looked up, just in time to see the massive, clawed foot of the Tatarak descending upon it. Then it didn't see anything else, ever again. 40 feet above, on the Tatarak's broad back, Anawa winced at the sound of Vaki being crushed. He was no fan of the Order Enforcers, but the more he saw of the Tatarak, the more he was starting to think luring it back to the surface had been a mistake. It had already smashed 6 buildings to fragments and damaged countless more, and that was with Kraka directing its journey. What would happen if it went on a rampage? One thing was certain. Anawa had never seen anything like this beast. When the Tatarak climbed out of the hole, he was certain nothing could be that big. The Rahi regarded Anawa as if the Toa Hordika were a light snack. The Tatarak's reptilian face was ringed by silver fins, and his fierce jaws snapped in anticipation of a meal. His forelegs were surprisingly short, but the rest of his body was overwhelmingly huge and powerful. A single sweep of his tail was enough to turn a building into a pile of bricks. "I want the answer!" the Tatarak snarled. "Give it to me!" "What is he talking about?" asked Pooks. "I don't know," said Kraka. "That is all he would say when I found him down below. So I told him the Visorak have the answer, and they don't want him to know it." Anawa shook his head, smiling. "If you weren't what you are, you would have made an amazing Toa." Kraka shifted her form to a perfect replica of Anawa and said simply, "I know." Nuju stood back to back with Koalas as the Visorak closed in. His ice spinners had managed to hold them off so far, but each one drained his energy that much more. He had already decided that if the Visorak began spinning webs, he would grab Koalas and leap, counting on his spinners to form an ice slide beneath them. Any risk was worth taking to avoid being in those cocoons again. The building shook beneath his feet. A few seconds later, it did it again. "Is this the Visorak's doing?" Nuju asked. "I don't think so," Koalas answered. "They seem as disturbed as we are." Nuju glanced past the ring of spider creatures. Now the source of the tremors was all too clear. Not that the Toa Hordika believed it for a moment. After all, who ever heard of 2 Toa, Anawa and a Rahaga, riding a Rahi 4 stories high? "I knew being a Toa would do this eventually," Nuju said quietly. "I have lost my mind." Now the Visorak saw the newcomers as well. A few of them braced to launch spinners at the oncoming Rahi. Then the Tatarak casually shrugged, bringing down 2 buildings and a major chute intersection in the process. That was enough to make the Visorak fall back, forgetting Nuju and finding more defensible positions on another rooftop. "If you lost yours, mine went with it," said Koalas, smiling. "A Tatarak! Imagine! I never thought I would see one in the flesh." Seeing that the name meant nothing to Nuju, Koalas continued. "It's a predator from one of the lands south of Metru Nui. Down there, there were whole packs of them filling the plains. Once they had eaten everything they chose to on one island, they would walk across the sea and start someplace else. But I can't imagine how one got this far north, or why it would be traveling alone." The Tatarak was upon them now. Nuju tried not to gag from the stench of its fetid breath. Both Anawas jumped off and landed on the roof, while Rahaga Pook stayed on the Tatarak. Just what Metra Nui needed, said Nuju. Two of you. One of the Anawas shifted into the form of Nuju. Is this better? The figure said in Nuju's own voice. For obvious reasons, I prefer to avoid mirrors just now, the Toa Hordika replied. I had hoped to avoid you as well, Kraka. I want the answer, bellowed the Tatarak, the sheer force of his yell almost blowing Toa Hordika and Rahaga alike off the rooftop. So do I, said Nuju. A lot of them. Where are the others? We saw Vakama, Norik, Nokama, and Gaki heading this way from the air, said Koalas. As for Matau and Iruni, no sign. They were supposed to be searching one of the hangars, said Nuju. I'm guessing that one, Anawa replied, pointing off in the distance. The one the Vizorak are pouring into. We will have to get them, then. What? Snapped Kraka. You are wasting time. Every moment you delay brings Rudaka and her horde closer to complete control of this city. What is one Toa more or less compared to that? Anawa and Nuju said nothing in reply. Using their spinners to form bridges of ice and stone, they hurried toward the hangars. Koalas looked up at Kraka. If you can't understand, then they can't explain it to you. Light! Winua shouted, pointing up ahead. The Kagarak paused for a moment before resuming its march. Keep quiet, said Bomunga. If it hears us and turns back. Winua understood, but it was hard for him to curb his excitement. A pinprick of light had appeared up ahead in a world where all was dark. The Kagarak was moving right toward it. Winua felt certain it had to be an exit. Bomunga was keeping a careful eye on the creature. If that point of light was a gate, it would vanish the instant the creature passed through it. They would have to go through right behind or risk never finding the point again. He watched as the light grew bigger and brighter, mentally counting down the seconds. Run, he said abruptly, racing off to reach the Kagarak. Taken by surprise, Winua was a few steps behind. The creature reached the light and passed through. Bomunga and Winua dove, barely making it through before the gateway disappeared. They hit the pavement. Compared to the total darkness they had been traveling through, the brightness of this spot was like being hit by a fist. It took Winua a long few moments to adjust to the glare so he could see again. Then he wished he had not bothered. Toa Hordika and Rahaga were on the ground in Lemetru. The Kagarak was up ahead, standing beside a powerful, red-hued figure. Vizorak were everywhere, swarming into and around a tower. As soon as the spiders noticed the new arrivals, they advanced to surround Winua and Bomunga. How convenient, the figure exclaimed upon seeing the Toa Hordika.
You come to us instead of us having to hunt you down. For that, you have the gratitude of Sitarak, king of the Vizorak horde.
A worthless gift, growled Bomunga. Sitarak laughed.
Not at all. You two will be privileged to see the emergence of the Zivan into this city. It will no doubt be hungry after its journey. You two will make a fine meal, don't you think?
Matau and Iruni retreated further into the hangar. All their efforts to stop the advance of the Vizorak had failed. Every exit was blocked by the creatures as well. They both knew that, at best, they were delaying the inevitable. Any last words? Matau said, throwing another piece of equipment at the horde. Yes, said Iruni. Next time, keep the doors shut. Matau heard a crash behind him. He turned to see more Vizorak coming toward them from the rear. They were trapped between two small armies of spider creatures. That mud swamp on the island up above is looking better all the time, he said, launching an air spinner at the oncoming Vizorak. It never reached its destination. Instead, a second spinner flew down from above, striking the floor. A wall of fire suddenly sprang up, cutting off the Visorak. Matau looked up and saw Vakama and Norik standing at the top of the stairs. Now chaos erupted in the hangar. Water, ice, fire, and stone spinners were raining down on the Visorak. Battered by the sudden onslaught of elemental powers, the creatures retreated. Matau could guess why. Indoors, they were vulnerable to attack from too many hiding places, but with the Toa Hordika all in the hangar, the Visorak could go back to laying siege and eventually capture them. Vakama, Nokama, Nuju, and Anawa assembled at Matau's side, while Norik and Gaki secured the doors. "Not that I'm not ever happy to see you," said Matau, "but how did you get in?" "I melted through the doors on the roof," Vakama replied, his voice hard. I was the Toa of Fire. It's what I do." "Unfortunately, you made an entrance for the Visorak that we can't close," said Aruni. "They will be back." "I did what I had to do," snapped Vakama. "I didn't see you coming up with any great ideas, Rahaga." "There must be some way we can get out of here before they return," said Nokama. "Matau, is there a way out through the archives?" Before the Toa Hordika of Air could answer, a tremor shook the building. Then it rocked on its foundations as the roof was torn off, sending Visorak flying every which way. Startled, they looked up to see Pooks smiling down at them as the Tatarak crushed the hangar roof to dust in his hands. "Oh good," said Nuju, "our ride is here." Bound with webbing, when Nua and Bomunga could only watch as the Kakarak opened another gateway into the field of darkness, Visorak backed away, scurrying for cover, when Nua wished he could join them as the Zivan began to emerge. It was gigantic, a horror so great the Toa Hordika had to make an effort to keep his sanity. Even in his days as an archivist, he had never seen such a thing. Towering over the nearby buildings, it looked like some obscene hybrid of a Visorak, an Ussel crab, and who knew what else. Its head was pure spider, but the twin claws that snapped buildings in two like dry twigs belonged to a sea creature. It moved about on 6 legs, its scorpion-like tail lashing out to level anything that caught its eye. Even Sidorak looked like he was questioning the wisdom of bringing this thing into the world. The Visorak were keeping their distance, those that were not running away outright. One of the spiders made the mistake of running along a web too close to the Zivan. It snapped the unfortunate Visorak up in a claw and tossed it into its gaping jaws. "Those fools," said Bomunga. "Those stupid fools."
"What is that thing?"
"No one knows its true name," said Bomunga. "It lives in the darkness we just passed through. It's not Visorak, but it has aided them in the past."
"Why?"
"It likes to keep its food source handy," the Rahaga replied. "The Zivan eats Visorak, has been known to celebrate a victory by devouring half the horde it fought beside."
"Then why bring it here?"
asked Wanua, shocked. "Sidorak wants the Toa dead," Bomunga replied, "even if he has to destroy Metro Nui and everyone in it to make that happen." High above, the Zivan's eyes narrowed at the sight of the helpless Toa Hordika and Rahaga. Saliva dripped from its mandibles, falling like rain on the Visorak tower as it lumbered towards its next meal. End of Chapter 8.